your time. So thank you, Tanayo. We're going to get started, and people will keep rolling in, but that's okay. We have a lot of intros to do. We really want this meeting and this training to be generative and facilitative. So we'll be talking a lot, but we also want to give you all the mic a lot of the time to hear from your wonderful experiences, your perspectives. So with that, we can get started. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me make sure I shared the right screen. You all are seeing building trust for decision making. Okay, great. You'd think after a year and a half of working remote, I wouldn't get the same panic every time that I would share, wondering which monitor I'm actually sharing. So with that, I'll pass it over to our team at the Training Institute to introduce us today and level set how this morning is going to go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. I just wanted to say hello, good morning, welcome to everyone. As Kelly mentioned, it's always nice to see some familiar names and faces in this online space, as well as some of you that are joining us for the first time. My name is Gina Rodriguez. I use the she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Senior Project Manager for the Community Health Training Institute, or CHTI, or Training Institute. It has so many names, but we are a project that is funded by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and we sit inside the Health Resources in Action organization, which is a nonprofit that is housed in the city of Boston. Our offices are in Chinatown, but we are all coming to you remotely from different places. I am physically located in central Massachusetts, specifically. And we've been doing this project, or I've been doing this project for about 5 years now, and it's always nice to sort of see all the different folks that come into this space to learn about all the different things that we hope to offer. And we hope that this training is helpful for you. All of the trainings that we offer are always free because of the funding from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And so this is the second training of this calendar year, which is really exciting. And all of our trainings are recorded. You probably heard the robot voice that started just a few minutes ago. So after this training, you'll get a copy of that recording as well if you want to revisit, if you want to share any of that information. So we invite you to visit our website as well. You can find us at hriainstitute.org, where we have a calendar of all of our upcoming trainings, as well as a whole list of resources. CHTI is also the only online coalition database in the state of Massachusetts. So if you are doing coalition work in the state and you are not listed on our roster, we invite you to join us and add your information. And if you're looking for other folks that are doing similar work in your area or in other areas, please come visit our website and take a look at our wonderful coalition map where you can find more information. So again, welcome, excited to be here with you all. If you have any questions throughout the training, we invite you to add them into the chat box, unmute yourself, join the conversation, and we're to be here with you today. Our tech lead for today is our wonderful Tanayo Crow, so I'm going to pass it to her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Gina. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanayo Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Community Health Training Institute. I've been on this project for about 3 years and really love the work that we do. So I'm here today to help out with any tech questions. I'm trying to furiously respond to all of you who thank you for letting me know the PowerPoint did not send the first time. Hopefully in the last few minutes you have gotten the updated version. If you have not, you can feel free to message me privately and I'll send it to you individually. And other than that, if you have any other questions, just let me know. And yeah, hopefully everything is well. Back to Gina or Kelly.
Take it away, Kelly. Or Jamia, whoever's going.
I think we're going to introduce ourselves in a little bit. If you all just want to ground us in Zoom tech and how we're going to be using its functionalities today.
Wonderful. Yeah, happy to do so. So if you have not been living in the Zoom world for the last year and a half, this is a quick run through. We don't want to make any assumptions about what people know and don't know about Zoom. And because it's always ever changing as well. So we want you to get familiar with the bottom bar of Zoom screen where you can do lots of different functionalities. You can mute and unmute yourself, so you can physically join and add your voice to the conversation, and also share your video. If you are able to share your video, we invite you to do so. It's always nice to see faces react to the content and to see smiles and laughter, that wonderful stuff that comes with sharing your screen. If you are not able to, don't feel guilty. We totally understand. Or if you don't want to, also don't feel guilty. We completely understand as well. But yes, invite you to bring yourself into this space as much as you are able. As Kelly mentioned, when folks are able to share their experiences, their reactions, their thoughts and questions, it just enriches the training as a whole. And so those will find those two buttons. I also want to mention too, if we do end up, if one of the hosts ends up muting you, please don't take it personally. Minimize background noise, especially when we have a training of over 60 people, just to make sure that we're able to hear the questions as they come up and the comments as folks are jumping into the conversation as well. If you want, we invite you to add your pronouns to your name on your screen so that we may refer to you with the right pronouns. And you can do that by hovering over your screen, kind of where you see your face or your name if you're not sharing your camera. And there are 3 little dots where you can click and you should have a menu that comes down, and you should have the option to rename yourself. So if you're able to, we invite you to add your pronouns to your name as well. And then some of the other options that you have to interact is the chat box. Some of you have already used it. It's also on the bottom bar of your screen, the little talk bubble where you can go in and type into the chat and ask questions and add to the conversation. And also on the right-hand corner of your screen, you can see and change your view. So you can see gallery view, speaker view. I always try to keep it on gallery view so I can see as many faces as possible, especially with large trainings like this, and see how people are responding to the information that we have today. We're also going to be doing some breakout rooms, so that'll be something that'll pop up on your bottom bar as well. And then the annotate function as well, which is something that you can do to write on the screen, and we'll talk you through that when that comes up. But yeah, this is just another quick kind of run through of how the breakout rooms work. We're going to be doing some small group conversations. You'll be assigned to a room, and when in doubt, if you're confused or you need help, all you have to do is tap the little ask for help button. One of us will come in and rescue you and save you from your breakout room if you have any questions. And I think with that, oh no, also one last point about Zoom. I love all these wonderful slides. I always forget that they're coming, but if you have bandwidth issues and your sound is going in and out, we invite you to change your audio to phone audio. And you can do that by clicking the little up arrow next to your mute button and hitting the switch to phone audio. And that way it kind of takes all of the, or a little bit of the weight off of your Wi-Fi. And so all it's in charge of is really sharing your video, and then your phone is where you get your audio from. So we invite folks to do that are having any sound or Wi-Fi issues. And I think that is it. Wonderful. If you have any questions about any of it, please feel free to chat us in the chat box, and we'll be happy to walk you through. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gina and Tanayo, and I'm excited to be able to be here. It's a rainy morning here in Boston, but I am hoping that we will bring a little liveliness. I know Tuesday mornings are always rough. We'll try to be as engaging as possible through this as we talk about how we do build trust through different ways to engage with our members and our residents in the community that we work with. So we just want to do some introductions, and we'll be practicing ways in which we build those relationships. So my name is Jamia Tappan. I'm Associate Director of Health Equity and Community Investments here at HRIA. And this is me pre-pandemic on one of the last trips I took, which was to Jeju Island in South Korea. And it was amazing. This is one of the few waterfalls that I explored. And I miss traveling. I am planning a trip. I'm being very brave with, the vaccine and everything to go travel somewhere else in the next couple months. So I'm excited to get back into that. And I'll let Kelly introduce herself as well.
Good morning, everyone. Again, thanks so much for joining us. I took some inspiration from Jamia's picture, and I also added a picture of myself from the last time that I left the country and went on vacation pre-pandemic. So that's me in Scotland visiting some friends. I used to think the world was too big of a place to ever go back to the same place twice. And then I met some lovely people from Glasgow, and I feel like I just went back every year to hang out with them and see the beautiful country. But I'm a program manager at Health Resources in Action. I've been at this organization for 5 years now, which it's crazy. It went by really fast. I've done a lot of things with the organization, the Training Institute being the most consistent project I've been on, but I also have done a lot of substance use work via overdose prevention trainings, developing some toolkits around the rights of people in treatment and recovery, and used to be in Boston, and now I relocated and I'm in Vermont managing our Vermont substance use help link here. So it's also rainy in Vermont, so don't be jealous. I'm experiencing the same rain that you all are in Massachusetts, assuming that you all are zooming in from there as well. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today and talk through how we can build trust in virtual spaces.
Kelly. So just a few objectives for this session is we want to identify some promising practices for building trust with our community members, and think about what that could look like in person as well as virtual. Some things are similar and some things are very different, but we really want to think about the different ways that we engage with folks. And particularly thinking about the ways in which we bring community voice into decision-making. A lot of this training is representative of sort of my growth. My background is in social work and community organizing. And through my work and engagement with a variety of different types of organizations, from movement building to grassroots to service-based organizations, I have found that the most meaningful way to engage with people is in opportunities where they feel they have autonomy over the decisions that impact them, and that they feel like their opinions and their experiences are valued and matter in a space. And so, these are just some ways in which we feel that folks can bring their experiences, bring themselves into the space, build trust amongst one another, sort of try to dismantle some of the existing power dynamics that are very obviously there, and really try to create space for decision-making and power sharing. So this is a quote that I appreciate. Hillary Clinton, we can think about her in lots of different ways, but I appreciate this quote because, it really speaks to people really feeling valued in our democratic processes. So there cannot be true democracy unless all citizens are able to participate fully in the lives of their country. And we do often think of democracy in this very political space, right? But the actual act of democracy is everyone has a voice, everyone has a vote, everyone opinion is valued. And we can think about beyond just political thinking and really think about what some of those principles are in our daily practices and the ways in which we engage with our partners. And so we'll share some of those principles here as well, but really to just think broadly about what does democracy look like to you and how have you seen it being practiced in an authentic way, and where do you see it sort of being having some challenges and not really living up to its full potential. So we've shared who we are, and we would really like to kind of hear a little bit more about you. So if you don't mind putting in the chat your organization, as well if you haven't updated your pronouns yet and your name, we appreciate if you do that as well, where you're zooming from, and something that you're looking forward to, I would say learning in this space. We would really like to kind of be able to, hear what people are hoping to gain from this and take that in and adapt this session. So you can feel free to put those things in the chat. I think that when I was mentioning about democracy, like it would also be really great to just hear like your thoughts on what that might be as well, if you care to share that. You know, when you have seen democracy being practiced in a positive way and where you have seen challenges, if you care to share that as well. Jesse, I was just in North Adams. I, for the first time, took the Mohawk Trail and to do some leaf peeping, and it was a beautiful drive. And I'm from Connecticut. I'm embarrassed to say that I'd never been on the Mohawk Trail. And it was such a lovely ride. And I ended in North Adams. I felt very accomplished that weekend. Oh, great. From Amherst. Oh, hi, Cheryl. I know you. Virginia, wow. I just listened to an NPR podcast about your governor election that's coming up, and it seems very exciting. I am from Hartford, Connecticut, so I'm loving this representation of Connecticut here. So this is great. Thank you all for adding to the chat. Please keep adding, and we'll keep going on the slides. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to break out into our first small group to give you some time to really think through and sort of set a foundation of what could be useful for this. So again, thinking about what would be useful opportunity to use the tools here in this meeting. So we want you to describe a meeting or community event, online or in person, really, where you really felt your opinion mattered and was heard, and your experience was brought into the space. You felt welcomed. You felt like you could really sort of be your true self in that space. And as you're thinking through this, think about like those feelings that you had and what made you feel that way. Does this make sense to everyone? So we're going to spend a little time in these small groups. Please do introduce yourselves in the small groups. Kelly just put this breakout discussion into the chat. And we can put it in again, or just make sure you catch that Kelly's last message, because once you go into the breakout groups, I don't think we can connect you back or chat you back unless we're in the group. So again, think about a meeting, describe a meeting where you felt welcomed and your opinion mattered in that meeting, and what made you feel this way. And when we come back, we'd love to hear some of that experience. All right, we can go into the rooms.
Okay, I think that might be everyone.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. So we'd love to hear from a few of you about your experience in a meeting or community event where you felt your opinion was valued. We'd love to just hear from a few of you if you want to unmute and speak.
I will talk about one of very few group engagement things that I actually do feel very good in. I'm in recovery and on the spectrum, so it's very hard for me to feel comfortable in situations. But I do really like going to the book groups at Worcester's Library. They've been virtual, so I can chill here from home, and the group likes they decided to use the book I suggested, which felt really good. I hope everyone reads this book. It's called The Street by Anne Petrie, and it is a super harrowing tale of racism and not having enough money. And it takes place in, like, I think the 1930s, 40s. But that is one of very few times I feel good. It's when I get to talk about books or topics.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Christine. Would anyone else like to share?
I'll share. Hi, I'm Kristen. I work for Recovery Cafe in Lowell, Massachusetts. And there's about 12 or 13 other branches all throughout the United States. And actually, I think there's one in Canada as well. And anyways, every week they have what they call a boost call, and at least one person from every location comes. And like it never gets canceled, which is like a good thing because, you know, they take it very serious. They want to check in. They want to see your face. They want to hear how you're doing, how your location's doing, and how you're doing just personally. So that feels good. And everybody goes, everybody talks. Sometimes they bring up like a little goofy thing to add in to whatever you're talking about. So that's fun. And people are always giving feedback in the chat, or after you're done, when they talk, they'll bring up something you said and congratulate someone or motivate them or whatever it is. But every time I go, I always, leave feeling like I was heard, and like, even though I don't know them, like they know me and they care. So that's a good thing. And nobody ever leaves when someone else is talking. People are like focused on whoever's speaking as best as they can. So it always makes, I think, everybody feel good when they go. So that's mine. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate that. Both you and Christine really brought up two important points, is that you were kind of invited into this space, and they kind of were able to create something that was of interest and important to you. And Kristen, I hear you saying like really caring and asking about how you're doing and feeling like, they really truly do want to know this. And Christine, speaking to an interest of yours, which is books and reading, and that was really and taking your suggestion or book suggestion and making that part of the broader discussion. And so you really felt heard, you feel valued, and those are really important things. And they were able to kind of cater to your individual needs. And that's really important. So I really appreciate you all sharing those things. So we can keep going. So let's think about get into a little more thinking around what does participatory engagement, what does democracy look like? One important process is called participatory budgeting, where there is an allocation of resources in a city or state budget for a community to make a decision about how that is allocated. And this is a really important process, participatory budgeting, or PB, because people who are participating are allowed and given power to how funds are used. And when we really think about power dynamics, money, allocation of resources, who gets funding and who does not, we know that there are a certain group of people that are making those decisions, whether it's politicians or funders or philanthropic funders or whoever it is, that they're usually making those decisions. Sometimes they may have advisory boards or have opportunities to hear and get input from community members, but at the end of the day, they make those decisions. And so you have to have trust that they are going to make a decision that reflects your best interests. And what a democratic process, and particularly participatory budgeting, is giving that power to community and sharing in that decision making. And so we do have resources on here that we're not going to get into too much about what participatory budgeting is and how that process can really be uplifted into broader community decision making. So I want to share here some of those principles of what that democracy looks like. And these are also from the participatory budgeting process. So in the slides we gave you, there's links to some of these examples. So the six principles that they're uplifting is real decision-making power, more responsive government, expanded civic engagement, developing new community leaders, building community, and create opportunities for equity. I really want to kind of focus on like two of these issues because they're really important to broader decision-making. And the idea of what real decision-making power is so important because sometimes we are so separated from the things that are part of our lives and the decisions that we can make. Like, you know, sometimes we don't get to really choose what job we have and we have to work and feel like sort of bogged down by multiple jobs, or, you know, the healthcare that we have, or the school that our children go to, or the types of food that we can afford to eat, things like that. There's so many things that we forget, like this is not necessarily something that we always have autonomy over. And so to create a space for real decision-making power where people actually feel like their life is impacted can be really difficult. And so to get that trust, to feel like it is really valued and your opinion is valued, is so important. And the other one I want to highlight is developing new community leaders. This is so important because we sometimes see the same people in positions of power, and it never kind of rotates. It never gives opportunity for people to learn new skills, to develop their own skills. And that they're not necessarily representative of people in the community. Broadly, we can think of like the lack of representation of maybe low-income people, BIPOC, you know, people of color, and other marginalized and historically excluded populations. And what are we trying to do to create space for them to have greater opportunities and greater sense of empowerment? So how do we create spaces for that? And so as people become more engaged, become more involved, become more valued, we are in a sense supporting their own leadership and sense of empowerment. And this isn't like to think about like necessarily allyship or like I am giving you a helping hand, but this is allowing them the space to develop on their own so that they feel like they are valued in that space. And part of that has to do with having a better understanding of who your members are. So try to keep these kind of broad principles in mind about how you can even, you know, take these ideas and translate them into other types of community engagement spaces. And so the next slide is really kind of highlighting like how do those principles potentially play out? Meeting people where they are is essential. Like Christine and Kristen brought up some really good examples of meeting people where they are. In the chat, I heard some people talking about, you know, those who have experienced trauma and building relationships with them. That is, you know, that time frame of building relationships and building trust is long, right? Sometimes you can build trust and build relationships with people very quickly, and sometimes it takes years. And you have to think about how do you create more opportunities to meet people where they are, to bring them in, to allow them to feel comfortable, and to kind of create those opportunities to, you know, build those essentially leaders in your community. And as you know, kind of adjust your own expectation of where a community should be, where a relationship should be, you will learn to adapt to that framework, right? And, you know, think about this even in your personal relationships. Like, you know, what does that look like to meet someone where they are, to adapt to them, to support them, and to help them feel like there's space to grow, space for them to be their true selves. And as you build those relationships, you will facilitate change, not only change in that dynamic, in that relationship, but broader change as you engage more folks in your community, more residents, more members, and they will begin to support and build relationships amongst each other. And so that's how you get to like larger community organizing and movement building, is because there's that trust, because there's this collective there's this kind of shared thinking and understanding of where we are and who we are as individuals, but also who we are as a group, and moving towards some sort of action or decision making. And so you may not get to that, that what does authentic decision making look like immediately, but you're working towards it. And that's why it's so important to kind of work and build that relationship, to build those leaders, to get to the point where you really do have authentic space for decision making. And of course, community first. And so whatever that is, whatever that could look like, it's like a broader reflection of meeting people where they are, but really kind of honing in on the needs of the broader community. Sorry about that, Tanayo. So when we think about engagement, so we want to kind of, actually, can we go to the next slide? All right, I'm sorry, go back. I just want to make sure I'm in the right space. So like when we think about, what sort of those ideas around community engagement and what that could potentially look like when we're moving from a in-person to a virtual space. I'm going to do the next slide first and then come back. So, when we are trying to get sort of that initial connection with our members, some of them are people we've already met with, and some of them are people that are sort of our new engagements, and some are longer term engagements. And so this is going to be like more of like strategic ways and ways on how to engage them. These are sort of 6 basic ways to reach out. And we think of them as very traditional ways of doing outreach. But what does this potentially look like in a virtual setting is important to consider. So now we're kind of in this sort of hybrid space, right? But I think we've learned that we're going to have to kind of continue some of these virtual spaces because some people are more successful in virtual spaces and are more comfortable in virtual spaces. And so we're going to have to kind of develop these more hybrid models of doing in-person engagements as well as virtual engagements. And it's important, again, what is best for the person that you're trying to reach? Some people prefer in-person and some people prefer virtual settings. So it's important to kind of do some of these traditional outreach, these ways of outreaching, but with a spin. So when we think about like street outreach, right? And this is kind of like maybe could be one-on-one contact, one-on-one conversations on the street, setting up at a grocery store or a very lively part of the neighborhood at a certain time and things like that. And we can still do this, right, in the time of pandemic or whatever, but how we then maybe want to follow up with that. So I find like a great way for street outreach is getting contact information. So people may feel uncomfortable, but most people, if you talk to them and you say, hey, are you really interested in this sort of topic? Can we put you on our email list? I know, people have like that spam email account that they use, but people are willing to give you emails versus having a long extended conversation with you on the street. And so as you're kind of building out a potential list of people, you can then connect with them in other ways. And that could be asking them to do volunteer work or sharing additional information about what this organization is about to bring them into the group. If you're, perhaps having a reading group or a group for a prevention group or something like that, that you are kind of creating the right sort of marketing materials to get them engaged in the process. And you can shift that into like one-to-one contact. So, hey, I saw you out in the community. You shared your email, and I just wanted to follow up with you, tell you a little bit more, make it more a little personal. And it's it's an email to them, but it allows them the space to feel like they weren't necessarily maybe hounded on the street where they may not have felt comfortable, but then you followed up with a one-on-one communication. You're sharing broader communications about, the upcoming events and the different things that they might be interested in. And then you followed them up with a one-on-one contact. They start to think that like, oh, it's not just some random email. And there's a lot of marketing research that supports one-on-one contact and one-on-one a relationship building is essential. And so you may not always get that person to follow up with you or respond to you, but at least you can start building that relationship. And, you know, if they're on their follow-up in your contact, you know, we check in with them every couple of months and you say, hey, we're still doing this. Would you be interested in any of these types of activities? And that's an opportunity for you to kind of merge sort of the in-person with the virtual to sort of meet sort of different ways to interact with people. I also think like door knocking can still be really valuable. You know, it's like election season and there's a lot of door knocking going on, and people in many ways like kind of crave like the one-on-one communication too, because they haven't maybe had as much of that in the past year, or they're still like somewhat isolated. And the one-on-one contact can be refreshing as well. And so, you know, it's always useful to kind of think about ways in which you meet with people and can follow up with people, and sort of trying to sort of match like the sort of energy that they're giving you. If they're feeling uncomfortable, don't push it, but it's always great to just get their email so that you at least have that contact, and people are willing to give out emails. And if you can go back to the other slide. So what is asking here is if you are having like, you know, different types of events, different types of activities, what sort of considerations or questions you need to be asking if this is like going to be virtual or worth an engagement. So maybe, you know, if it's to get individuals to attend an event, a meeting, an event, or like a broader public event, or is it just to get broader membership and sort of general outreach to support the things that you're doing? This is going to be really important, and sort of questioning and or like assessing what is the best way to go about engaging with someone. And there's always, when you're thinking about equity and the ways in which you reach people, like who might be left out of those conversations, and how we will think about the best way to meet. This is really important for members, like the people that are already engaged with you. Like if they do prefer to meet in person, how do you create that hybrid space, the space where they can do the in-person engagement and also have a virtual engagement? And so like, I think what Christine's example, I think you appreciated like being in a virtual space, that you're comfortable in your home, and you like the way that you were engaging with the other people virtually. And perhaps there's like a group of people that are in person and there's some people that are virtual, and you creating that space to do that. So I'm seeing the comments, and so let's like keep going to the trust building part, because I think that's what people want to get to. And I think this is Kelly, right? You're going to talk about this.
Yes. So I just want to go over to that. You know, we talk a lot about building trust, but I think before trust comes relationships, and relationship building can come in a lot of different ways. It can be icebreakers in the beginning of a training or a meeting, or it can even just be building relationships in the sense that you're being involved in every part of the process instead of just the end goal. I think when we think about how organizations and coalitions have historically engaged community, they've created their action items, they've created their priority items, and they've kind of elevated these like 3 important focus areas that they then bring to the community to vote on when they might miss out on getting that community voice in the process. So a lot of this trust really comes from taking that time to engage the community, engage their voice, and to allow spaces where they can show up in their whole and true selves and really participate in all parts of the process. And, you know, that definitely isn't easy. Building relationships and building trust doesn't happen overnight. It happens when, you know, you show up time and time again, and the person who is in charge of the meeting takes that time to create that intentional space where a lot of people can show up in their full and true selves and share whatever they have to say. So we have a couple of different strategies for how we can build relationships in not just coalition meetings, but also this can be team meetings, recovery meetings, you know, coalition meetings, like city committee meetings, all of that. So when it comes to building relationships, it really is just about getting to know people instead of just getting right down to business. So, I've been to a lot of climate action meetings before I moved to Vermont. I was really involved in that space in Boston. And what I really appreciate about those spaces is that we never immediately just got right into, okay, here's what we're doing in Boston. We're talking coastal resilience and, tell me what you think. Give me your action plans. It was always, making time to network beforehand, whether that was in person or virtual, doing silly icebreakers like playing Pictionary, doing scavenger hunts. And sometimes I think we live in this culture of productivity, right? Where it feels like we're wasting time if we are chatting, catching up, doing icebreakers instead of like getting the work done. But you can really do the work better when you put in that time to build these relationships and build that trust. Because I think the more you get to know the group that you're in, the better you can feel more empowered to share a bit more about who you are. And I think a lot of, the trainings that we do at the Training Institute, we bring together a group of people clearly from across the country who don't know each other. And it can feel really scary over Zoom to unmute yourself and share what you think. So that's why we try to model how we might build relationships in this short time period. We only have 2 hours. We don't think we're going to all walk away knowing all of our life stories, but we're still sharing things like what we want to get out of this training, where we're coming from, and just a little bit more about ourselves so that when it does come time to go into small groups, to unmute yourself in front of the large group, hopefully you feel like you have trust in the space and trust in us that you can share your opinion and that you can feel empowered to unmute yourself, because it is a very vulnerable thing to do sometimes. So how we like to build relationships and build trust in both in-person and virtual spaces is to do those icebreakers that might feel silly, but they're always good to getting to know people, but also doing some networking time. When I think about going to in-person meetings, I always think about how I'd get there maybe 15 minutes early before the training started. And, organically, you would just naturally talk to people while you're getting coffee, getting water, or just sitting around. But in Zoom world, it's hard to recreate that. So I think, if you have a coalition meeting that starts at 10, maybe, open up the room at 9:45 for optional social time, networking time. It can be facilitated, it can be unfacilitated. It's just a good time just to try to recreate that sensation of you're mingling, the training's about to start, you want to get to know people, and just have those conversations before you dive into whatever topic area that you'll be focusing on. Another way of doing this too is to also just doing check-ins. And this can be a temperature check. It could be on a scale of 1 to 3. How are you doing today? And why we like to do this is because, how we are showing up into the space is so contextual. I could be really tired. I could have been stuck in traffic and come into a meeting really stressed. And so I don't want to put that on the group at all. If I come in really stressed and, I'm distracted and people are like, oh, why is she so frazzled? Why is she feeling like she doesn't want to be here? When you do that check-in, you have that opportunity to say, here's what I'm bringing into this space. Not saying that the group should take that on, but just to give name and give power to it, to say, listen, I'm really anxious. Here's how I'm showing up in this space today. Or like, I'm really excited because this cool thing just happened to me this morning. It's another short way of getting to know where people are at and to get to know a little bit more about them too in quick spaces. And kind of with that check-in goes hand in hand with modeling honesty too. When I was doing in-person trainings, I was living in Boston and would drive all across the state. And sometimes, it would be really hard in traffic and I would show up to places and I would just have to say in the beginning, like, listen, like I am a little bit late. I was stuck in traffic. I'm a little frazzled. And I think once as a facilitator or as a person who's running the meetings, when you model honesty and kind of where you're at in the day, it helps others kind of give them permission to also do the same too, because we're all flawed, imperfect beings and you can't expect to show up into a space at 10 time and time again. So I think the more we bring our whole selves to the space, as people creating these meeting spaces, we then encourage the meeting participants to do the same. And that builds relationships and that builds trust, because you trust them enough to share where you're at. So therefore, they will feel like hopefully they can share where they're at, which then goes into, once you get into the actual work, they can share their opinions, whether it is in support of whatever you're meeting about or if they're bringing a different perspective. And I mentioned this above too, but another good thing is just to do optional unstructured social time. This can be at the beginning of a meeting, it can be after, or during a break too. You can turn off your camera, go get water or something, or you can stay and do a quick 10-minute social break. But building in these times during virtual meetings helps to mimic that natural downtime that we experience in in-person meetings and trainings as well. And these are just some quick examples for icebreakers. We did one today around, what do you expect? What are you excited to learn about in this training? So they can be relevant to the work that you're doing, or they can be totally different. What's your favorite book? What are you reading right now? What's your favorite fall activity? The other day I was in a meeting and someone asked, if you were writing a memoir, what would you name it? And I started being like, I've never thought about this before. So it can be interesting just to see it, it can go in any direction, silly, serious, or relevant to the work. You can also do a scavenger hunt, which is always fun, which is where you find 3 objects around you. We always do these 3, something that brings you joy, something soft, and something you need for work. And people will usually hold up their puppies or their cats or a picture of their children. And it's always just a nice way to, again, get a glimpse into people outside of the space that they're coming in today. There are also a lot of games you can play over Zoom as well, like Pictionary. So that can be fun for that optional social time too. So all things to think about, tools to put in your pocket for how to build some relationships.
So Kelly, before we get to the next thing, I just wanted to address 2 things in the comments. One, I just wanted some clarity from Karen on the type of meeting she's talking about.
Sure. I'm part of a committee in the town where I live that's subject to open meeting law, which means all our meetings are recorded. Interactions between people in between meetings has to be extremely limited. You can't communicate with more than a quorum of people, or you have violated open meeting law. And so creating trust when your meetings are being recorded and you're not supposed to talk to each other in between meetings feels like a really big challenge to me. And I know there's no easy answer, but I wondered if anybody else was affected by that and if you might address it, if so.
Thank you for clarifying that, Karen. Do you have thoughts, Kelly? I have a few things I might share. I think this is definitely, Kelly, did you have thoughts? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jamia. I was gonna say, you go.
I was like, I went away from your camera and I'm like, wait, I can't see you now. I think, so one thing I was thinking is, this is one of those things that are a little bit more upstream. So, the ways in which the meeting is operated, is that the best structure for you to have your meetings, and what is sort of that process look like? And again, this is way probably out of your control, but what are the things that you can control and feel like you have some autonomy over that? And perhaps that's having time before the meeting or after meeting, before the recorded part of the meeting, to have some discussion that's a little bit more free and relaxing, and creating a separate space. And if that means you kind of have to meet outside of this window or outside of this room to kind of have that more casual conversation, then perhaps that's what it is. But you may, if you can't change the system that exists, and trying to work outside of it, and creating spaces beyond that's just the actual meeting and the recording time, if that helps. And something around modeling honesty and oversharing, perhaps. I think this is an interesting thing. So this is about building trust in a space. I don't think people ever really overshare, because if that's what they're feeling in the space, it says something about, who they are and their personality and the ways in which they operate in spaces. And people sort of you know, perhaps if you may be offended or you feel like they may have said too much, you know, why is that? Why do we feel that way? What's making us uncomfortable about sort of what was shared? And this is how we think about our relationship dynamics, and how we sort of deepen our own understanding of ourselves, because we're learning from other people as well. And so I think, you know, modeling honesty can be really tough in vulnerable space. But I also think it's important if someone is bringing something, and this is going to take us into the next thing, if someone is bringing something into the space, then it's important to kind of address that, and that can deepen your relationship by that person being vulnerable and you being responsive and accepting of what they may be sharing. Yeah, and Kelly, I'll let you like go add to that, or, you know, transition into the next exercise.
Yeah, I can just say that, you know, for the open meeting law, I hear that, you know, we are confined by the parameters in which we are working within. And it can feel hard, I think, you're right, perception does matter. And if it feels like the officials are talking in the corner, maybe that's not the best. So I think there are hopefully ways that you can kind of meet the needs of the space that also serves a purpose of the people kind of watching the meeting and also the ones engaging in it too. And this is what I mean, like this stuff, it's complicated, it's complex, it's messy, and it's different for everyone. We all come with different areas that we're working in, and with these different areas come these restrictions. I think the best we can do is really to take some of these and adapt it to build that trust and relationship where possible. And maybe if it's an open meeting law with elected officials, maybe a lot of that work can be done outside. And what do they do to talk to the community, whether that's leading open forums that are outside of the open meeting law, which then informs that open meeting. So all things to think about. But like what Jamia was saying around that line of being honest and vulnerable, but not oversharing, share what feels comfortable. We're never asking people to bare their souls if it feels uncomfy, but sometimes things come up where you have to debrief that in a meeting or a space. And this can be in a group of strangers. If someone says something that's really charged and someone says, I feel really upset by that, I think if people say that, then what you do with that information says everything about how you want to build that trust and build that relationship. So making that pause, debriefing, going through it, even if it deviates from the meeting agenda, I think is really important. So I'll give you this framework, and then I'll give you one or two examples of how this has played out in my own experience. So we use this from our friends at the Southern Jamaica Plain Health Center. It's used in a lot of clinical settings, but it's nice to also use it in meeting settings too, as a quick check-in. And this is just called the window of affect tolerance. And it just shows a snapshot of where you are at in that time of day. So if you are at a -10, it's called hypoarousal. And this is the term of if you're like feeling really tired, feeling really lethargic, maybe you were up really late and you're feeling kind of tired, that would put you into the hypoarousal category. But the hyperarousal on the other side, that means like you're pretty, what we say, high in your window, because this is your window of affect tolerance. So this could be, again, you're stuck in traffic, you're really anxious, you're nervous, or something happens in a meeting that really charges you emotionally and that brings you up in your window. You're elevated, like your heart rate's elevated, maybe your palms are sweaty, you're talking about a difficult topic that's making you feel uncomfortable. So again, we use this framework from -10 to +10, which covers the whole spectrum of emotion. So if you're a 1, you're neutral. Things are great, you're fine. So if you're like a +2, maybe you're just happy to be here. You're excited, you're energized. You're a 3, maybe you had just 1 too many cups of coffee and you're like, I'm feeling a little jittery, but I'm okay. But anything kind of a 5 or above or 5 and below, if you say, that means that, you know, something's up and that you should take that time as the meeting facilitator to take that pause. So again, the window of affect tolerance is really just the snapshot of what you were bringing into this current space. So if you do this check-in, people can, you know, go around and say their number. So again, -2, pretty tired, didn't get much sleep. +2, feeling energized, feeling excited, feeling ready. But why we like to use this framework and why we have such a large spectrum of options to choose from is that if people are too high in their window, they're really mad, really anxious, or they're too low in their window because something is really going on that's upsetting them, it's good to take that pause. And to go through kind of why that is, because it's really hard. And again, to build trust and build relationships, it's really hard to do that if someone in your space is going through something that's being ignored if you're checking in this way. So one example that I can share is that we were checking in with a trainer for one of our CHTI trainings like years ago, and not years ago, probably last year, right around the beginning of the pandemic. And so we were recognizing the context of the world that we were living in, doing this check-in as just a quick icebreaker, just to share where we're at. And when we share this, usually we ask to share a little bit of reasoning as to why you're saying that number, but again, sharing whatever is comfortable. And so we run around and we were saying, oh, I'm a 2, I slept great, I'm a -1, my daughter kept me up late or something. And then someone in the room said, I'm actually at like a +7. Like I'm feeling really anxious. I just got a call from my school saying that, in-person school is back and I don't know if I want to continue working from home with my kids, or if I balance being this person, also manage being a parent and also like directing a lot of different programs, or if I want to potentially put my child at risk and put them back in-person school. And so this conversation just started before the meeting. She was really upset. And so the person who is leading the meeting immediately just stopped and was like, if you're a 7, what do you need right now? And it wasn't asking her to share. It wasn't asking her to leave the meeting to take that time. It wasn't asking anything of her. It was just putting that pause and saying, what do you need in this moment right now? Do you want to continue like, you aren't upset, or do you want to talk about it? And she decided that she wanted to talk about it. So we took about maybe the first 20 minutes. It was a small meeting just to talk more about it and support her in that moment. And this was a small group. So again, if you're in a meeting full of strangers, that might not be the case, that someone will want to share that. But I think it's important, again, just to pause and see what you do with that information. Are you, putting care into that person because you're sharing space? Are you letting them debrief? Are you letting them talk about it? Or are you just kind of moving forward in the agenda like nothing really happened? But Jimmy, I know you've trained a lot on this framework too. So is there anything that you want to add about this?
Yeah, I would say that, so to David's question, how do you know if it's +3 or -3? Sometimes folks do have a hard time with the numbers. The point is to really identify like how you are feeling. So you may just say, I am super anxious and I am high in a window. I don't know which way it is, but like, I'm just feeling really high, and that's okay. This goal of this exercise is to really get in tuned with like where you are and to check in with yourself and to create some sense of vulnerability with the people around you. And so if you are having people in a meeting, this is the challenge, right? We have goals, we have objectives, we have things that we're trying to do. And if a lot of people in the meeting are not in a place to participate in a meeting, how effective are you really going to be in that meeting? And so that's sort of the challenge, and that's about building trust, because if you put the objectives over sort of like the ways in which you connect with folks, sometimes it doesn't give you the long-term benefits of what you want out of a relationship. So sometimes you do have to kind of navigate that space and say, this was a really important, timely agenda item, and I'm hearing that, there are people that are not able to like engage with this. What do we do? What is our step? Having a conversation, and it prompts you to ask questions of each other about how to move forward. And in doing that, you're acknowledging someone's challenge, you're acknowledging the dynamics in the space, you're not just glossing over things, and you are able to come together and think about how to move forward. And that builds trust as well. So sometimes, it is, your meeting is not going ahead as planned, and you have to take the time to do it. And sometimes people can, take a minute. We have grounding exercises and things that can like recenter people and help them focus in a meeting, which could take another like 5 minutes. Like it's sort of like a meditative, like body scan check-in that can allow people to kind of have time to be in a meeting and move forward with an agenda. And sometimes you just need that time. And so as you build the relationship, as you do those things, those sort of things come naturally about how you proceed together to reach the objectives you want. And in the beginning, it is really challenging, but I think it's important to kind of center yourself and think about like, okay, I'm hearing like 2 of my colleagues are not able to do this. 2 people in our group are not able to really participate. Like, how can we adapt to what's happening? And even when everyone is in a good place, it allows you to just kind of hear how they're thinking and how they process and what's kind of going on in their life. And that also is important too.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a balance. We always talk in our organization about the head work and the heart work. And we spend so much time, I think, talking about the head work, about, what are our priority items? What are our goals? What are our objectives? How are we meeting them? When are we diving into these topics to actually make the decisions? But, I think it's really important to bridge the head and the heart work, because your heart impacts everything. Where you are in your, mental state today will impact how you show up at work. And so I think we can show up better when we feel empowered to bring more of this heart space to the work. But again, only sharing what is comfortable too. So that's one framework and one way of providing that check-in. And I think I saw a chat actually come in around the logistics around doing all of these check-ins. And I hear you. Sometimes when there's a group of 50 people and, everyone introduces themselves, everyone does their check-in, that could take the full hour. So there are ways to do that we can get into a little bit more later. But what we like to do is, if we have a large group and we want to do intros, we send people off into small groups to introduce in those small groups. And so, it's tricky because then not everyone gets a chance to hear how the group is doing, especially virtual. But it's good just because you're building those relationships, giving that check-in on a smaller scale that hopefully will apply to when folks are back in the larger group. But I hear you, it can take a long time, but sometimes it's worth it. And it's all context specific. So given that we're over Zoom, it's a lot harder to build relationships and to build trust, because, you can only see my body language from my shoulders up. And body language is so important. So how to build some Zoom trust is to create shared agreements. How do we want to be in this space today? And if you're going to be in a group that has never met before, it's important to have these shared agreements be generated from the group. I think it's nice to have an example, like we want to be present. That can be a good example of one, but it's good to make sure that the group is leading these agreements. And if you are a group that is a recurring committee that will meet again, it's nice just at the start of every meeting to say, and here's a reminder of our group agreements, and here's how we want to carry the space together today. And if a new person arrives, you can do an emoji reaction, give a thumbs up. Do you want to add anything? Do you want to change anything? Is this still relevant? Take that time for community building, do those icebreakers, do those check-ins, whether it be pair and share, small group, or a large group. Do an icebreaker, but also give time for stretch breaks. If you, again, invest in people's health, mental health, physical health, it helps them show up better in the space. So instead of doing an icebreaker, you can do a quick 10-minute stretch from your chair. You can just say, look out the window, take a break, give your eyes a break. You can also, what I like to do in Zoom reactions or in Zoom is to do the Zoom reaction. So if someone says something that I resonate with, or if someone shares good news, just doing that emoji react, it brings some of that emotive body language into a space that you might not be able to see. Because if someone shared good news when I was in person, they'll probably see me excitedly moving my body or clapping my hands, which you can't really see my hands clapping right now. But if I do the emoji react, it comes up in the top left-hand corner of my Zoom to show that I am celebrating with them. So that's another way, just again, to build community. And it's so small, but it really, I know I feel good when I say something and I'll see my coworker put up a little heart or a smiley face emoji. And what's also good for building trust is having clear roles and expectations. So if you know going into a meeting that you're going to be the facilitator and you're going to be the note taker, it's what's coming, you know what to expect, and you trust the process. So it's not just about trusting the person and the people in the meeting, but trusting that there is a process and that you are following it and that it's designed to help facilitate this discussion. And as both Gina and Jamia modeled, is to provide that Zoom orientation. You never want to assume how comfortable people are with Zoom. And if you want people to participate and make them feel empowered to do so, giving that space to show exactly how, I think, can make a real difference for someone who might not be as familiar with Zoom or might forget and feel silly asking, how do I annotate when everyone seems to know how to do it? So just providing that level setting is just a good way to make people feel empowered no matter where they're coming in from. So now I'm going to hand it back to Jamia to do this next piece.
If I can just add to some of the icebreakers, I think the facilitator has a responsibility to ensure some sense of safety in a space. And so if a certain icebreaker is not conducive to creating that safety, it's not going to work, I wouldn't suggest using it. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily use the window of tolerance with someone you're never going to see, a group you're never going to see again, with people, you know, no matter how large the group is, if they're not people you're continuously interacting with, I would not use that exercise. This is really for relationship building again. And so if this is assuming sort of this whole meeting is assuming sort of longer term, like how you connect with someone initially, how you continue to meet them where they are and build those relationships with one another. And so you are adjusting to adapt to what that is. And I think, you know, this isn't necessarily what we're talking about here, but the ways in which, you know, white supremacy culture and oppression and racism and different things show up in these spaces, and the challenges that we have in sort of adjusting to accommodate for sort of people's vulnerability is not part of our culture as Americans, right? And so we're trying to create and sort of shift culture, and our organizational cultures are all very different. Our personal cultures are different. And how do we kind of create a space where people can feel welcome and be themselves in a space, bring their culture to a space to shift and adapt the broader group culture and the organizational or structural culture that is sort of within the hierarchy, I guess. So we're going to practice one of the sort of participation tools. And so this is going to be the annotate function. I'm sorry, David asked a question. And is it recommendable to use a role play sometimes? Can you explain what you mean by role play?
Okay, role plays is a tool when the people need learn about other behaviors, but need change maybe no adequate behavior. Okay.
So it's focusing on like behavioral change, like longer term behavioral change type things. Yeah. I mean, I think role play does work in clinical settings. And I think with the appropriate facilitation and training, I wouldn't necessarily use role play in broader like community meetings, but I think they have a purpose and a value, especially if you have shared agreements and understanding about what that looks like and what that means, and you kind of have an opportunity to debrief about the role play after. I think they have value there. And this is, I would use role plays in groups that are more comfortable with each other and are going to be meeting regularly with one another. So that's my recommendation. So have you ever been in a meeting that could have been an email? I'll know this. So I want us to kind of practice the annotate function. I'm always terrible at explaining this. So at the top of everyone's screen, they should see a box that says view options. And if you scroll down, there's a function that says annotate. And if you open that up, it provides you with a browser of different types of actions and stamps and arrows and different things. This tool is really great for having sort of like a whiteboard and like sharing things, moving things around. It can be fun for Pictionary online as well, which is a fun activity to do. And so yes, you guys are already doing it. You can use a stamp tool, whatever tool, to kind of play around with the arrow and with the annotate functions and just marking them up where you feel like they go. And so this is a really great tool. And so I think you guys are getting it. Great. Perfect. I see a cat. Oh my gosh, someone drew a cat, or is that a dog or a mouse? I don't know what that is, but I appreciate the artwork. Great. All right, so I wanted you guys to familiarize yourself with that just as a little tool that we like to use. But we also definitely know what this is about. Like, have you ever been in a meeting where you could have been, where it could have been an email, and you've been in there and you're just like, I did not need to be here. I don't have the time for this. Now I'm super anxious. I was okay. Now I'm like, okay, this is, now I'm out of the window in some ways. All right, I'm gonna make you guys stop using the annotate tool now so we can keep going. But I appreciate that you're all having fun with it. Perfect. All right, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And so what we like to think about is like, are there other ways that you can engage people to get decisions, to have conversations that are virtual, not just through meetings? And sometimes you need the meeting to set the context and the framework, but sometimes the actual decision-making things can happen outside of the meeting. So these are some tools that we have here. Kelly and I will kind of go through these, providing some examples. But some really good tools for polling and voting and making decisions are Poll Anywhere or Mentimeter. They have free functions as well. There's paid versions and free versions where you can ask questions and you can leave the poll open for people to vote. You know, you can use like Google Forms as well for this, or Office Forms, different things like that for these things. But I think what Poll Everywhere and Mentimeter allow you to do is sort of provide a little bit more functionality with the ways in which you may choose to do the voting. You can do more ranking and things like that. And the Zoom annotate function is just something we just did virtually, which is great tool to use for the live virtual meeting versus the outside of the meeting. And then there's lots of ways to do brainstorming. So let's say we had a meeting, people threw out a bunch of different ideas. You can take some of those notes and create like these brainstorming tools to kind of continue the discussion offline. So let's go through some of those. And I think, yeah, Kelly, I think you're going to do like the first few. Yeah, keep going.
I think we can skip these. These are good resources to keep in the slides, just more things to take a look at when you take a look in the PDF later. But I think one thing we just wanted to say too is just to acknowledge Zoom fatigue and address the context that we're living in now. And just to say that as you're doing all these different processes, give people permission to not share their video, to make the meeting a phone call if that's what folks need, and to make sure you put in enough breaks to make sure that people are, you know, stretching their bodies, stretching their eyes. I know one framework that really resonated with me came from my eye doctor. After I went for my yearly checkup, after a year of working from home, they told me to apply the 20-20-20 rule, which is that if your eyes are feeling exhausted from looking at a screen, every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds, and it helps minimize some of that strain. So, you know, if you're doing a long meeting, put in those like 20-minute break points, possibly, just to let people take that little break. But essentially what we want to talk about in this next piece is, you know, now that we've put some strategies towards how to build trust, now we want to talk about this interactive decision making. And I think, you know, it's like the chicken and the egg, the trust and the decision making. It's not like you need one before the other. I think you can achieve trust through participatory decision making. So when you have a meeting, I feel like the meeting always consists of two main things: the what and the how. And the what is the content. So what's the task at hand? What's your meeting topic? What problem do you have to solve? What decision has to be made? What are you even going over in your agenda? And what are your goals and objectives? And this is kind of where the poll that Jamia did earlier came from. Have you been in a meeting that could have been an email? If there is no decision to be made, if there is nothing to brainstorm, if you're just doing updates for updating, that can be an email. What makes for a meeting that has that is engaging and can't be achieved in an email has these process pieces, right? It has the decision-making methods, it has the relationship building aspect, tools for engagement, group norms, which are those group agreements that we talked about earlier, group dynamics, and the content too. So again, we're going to focus more on the how to achieve that interactive decision-making by using some of these things that we call process tools. So process tools look different online and in person, but the approach is exactly the same. It's just making that space and creating those opportunities for people to engage in ways that feel good and safe to them. And again, we realize that good and safe are words that are different for every single person, which is why it's important to diversify what these process tools might look like. So if you have a task and you have a goal, likely a decision has to be made and you need to brainstorm what that decision might possibly be. And you can brainstorm through using Google Jamboard, using a vision board, doing the Zoom annotate function, or using the Padlet, which I'm going to dive in more deeply in the next 4 slides to come. And then once you have your brainstorm, you have this fantastic list of all these different priority areas that you want to focus on for your coalition for the year. You can't focus on all 24 items that people brainstormed, right? So how do you whittle it down to maybe 3 or 4? You can do straw polling. So you can have people using the annotate function do an emoji react, or not using the annotate function. You can just have people do an emoji react. So say you have a priority area of you want to focus on getting more clean needles in your community. Is that a good focus area? In that case, you can say, what do you all think? Thumbs up, or would you rather focus on something different? Maybe community-based programming or something else. So you can do the thumbs up emoji react. You can do the Zoom annotate even. If you have a list of different brainstorming things, you can put a heart next to areas that you like, areas that you want to focus on. You can do a Zoom poll. You can create a poll in Zoom that you can launch saying, okay, we have, say, these 10 things, pick 1 or pick 3 that you want to focus on. And that's anonymous too. So again, the emoji react is public. So if you have a lot of trust built in and people don't feel like they can't share their opinion, maybe the emoji if you have a lot of trust in the group and people feel that they can share their opinion in a public way, the emoji react is a good option on how to vote publicly. But if people maybe don't want to share their opinion publicly, or it's a really large group of folks who don't really know each other, the Zoom poll is anonymous, and so is a poll anywhere. And that might be a good method of doing that too. So it just depends on what the trust is in the group, what the group dynamics are like, but there are lots of different ways you can take the brainstorm and start to highlight what things you want to focus on from that brainstorm. But you can also do it discussion based too. Some people don't like reading and writing and voting that way. Some people want to talk things through more. And you can do that in small groups where it's a lot easier and digestible to share your opinions and unmute yourself. If you're in a group of 5, as opposed to a group of 50, you can even do parent shares too. And we can also do affinity discussions too. And affinity discussions require some more planning and capacity for that. So if you're doing affinity-based discussions, usually they're around identity-based. So you can have either like a race affinity group, another identity-based affinity group. It could be really anything. It could be around levels in your organization too. You could have, coordinators go to one group, managers another group, directors in another group, but each group will have its own facilitator. And that's another way of just creating spaces where people can be fully present and bring their whole selves in ways that feel safe and good. But again, that just requires more planning because you need facilitators of folks who hold that identity and do those small groups that way. And then just a tip on how logistically to do that. What we've done in the past is that we've had a tech person organize these breakout groups, and depending on what affinity group people want to go to, they'll rename themselves. So again, if we're doing, say, like organizational level based groups, I would then change my name on Zoom to say manager or group 1, whatever. And then the person doing tech would know, okay, Kelly's going to group 1, this person's going to group 2, so on and so forth. So these are all ways to do small group works for folks who really enjoy that discussion-based opportunity. But some people just really are internal processors. They need to think before they share. either in a small group or a large group. And this is where leveraging individual work can be really good and also just soothing too. If you're doing a writing reflection of, think about what priority area you want your coalition to focus on. Write down what resonates with you. Usually we'll play music in the background. So it's a break for our voice. It's a break for our eyes. And I think, for me in my learning style, I really learn by writing things out. I'm a big journaler. I feel like I can't make sense of my thoughts unless they're written out in a linear fashion. And so when I write things down, I feel more prepared to share them in the large group. You can also do a drawing reflection too, if people like, if they like to learn through pictures and doing that artistic expression. You can also just do an active break. You can say, okay, we did our brainstorm. Now we're going to break for 10 minutes. Go on a walk, do something, do some stretching in your chair. You don't want to walk, and think about what you want to focus on when we return from the break. So it's still a break. You're still getting a chance to move, but you're still kind of thinking about what you want to bring to the group discussion, and you don't have to share. You can take time to formulate your thoughts through moving your body, which some people really need and enjoy. So these can all happen online. And these are process tools in person, and you'll notice that most of them are exactly the same. It's just a different modality. So Jamboard is basically a flip chart. Zoom Annotate is essentially a whiteboard. A large group discussion is just us talking to you, someone unmuting themselves in this large group, and doing movement activities. I think when I think about movement activities in a room, I think about, if you want to focus on youth substance use, go in this corner. If you want to focus on climate action planning, go over here. And then you can kind of vote by seeing, okay, there are a lot of people over here, not as many over here. And again, you're just moving around, getting a chance to talk to people in smaller groups that way. Once you're done brainstorming too, you can do straw polling in person by raising your hands, just like the emoji reaction. Or like, remember those little dot stickers that we would get in in-person trainings, and we'd like walk around and put the dots on the flip chart of ideas that we really liked? That's mostly anonymous. It's hard to be fully anonymous in person, but I think dot voting is much more low risk when we're talking about building trust. You can do poll anywhere, like Jamia was talking about, or more movement activities, like I said earlier, voting by going to the flip chart, whatever you need to do. And then small group work is very similar. Instead of going into a breakout room, dividing into small circles. Instead of going into a Zoom breakout room of just 2 people for a pair and share, you just turn to the person next to you and do that pair and share. And you can also do affinity-based discussions in person as well. But again, to uphold like the sanctity of that group, I would recommend being in a meeting space where you're allowed to go into separate rooms, just so you have that privacy in order to have those like safe and productive conversations. And then you can still do individual work in person too. Same thing, write it down, draw a picture, take an active break. So I think the real difference between in-person and virtual participatory decision-making, it's just the approach. The tools are very similar, or the approach is the same. It's just the tools change a little bit. Instead of using a whiteboard, you're using flip chart or using Zoom Annotate, so on and so forth. But again, the approach is still the same. You're meeting people where they're at, you're facilitating discussion, and you're trying to make space for people to engage in multiple different ways so that their voices can be heard. So one quick example that I talked about for the brainstorming is the Google Jamboard. So this is the virtual flip chart paper. So what I like about this is that you can write on it, you can draw on it, and you can collaboratively put on sticky notes. So for example, I put in here a coalition meeting. What are some things that we have to do? What are some topic areas that are in progress, and what are things that are done? And so you can color code the flip chart, the Post-it notes, you can draw, you can write. You'll see that my line drawing ability is not great using my laptop keypad, but the effort is still there. So you can input to do. We still have to create monthly blog posts, we still have to schedule our tweets, we still have to create an agenda, and I can collaboratively work on this section while maybe my other colleague talks about what's already in progress. So again, this is very similar to using flip chart in an actual meeting space. There's also Padlet, and this is great when you have already like a list of priority areas that you've elevated from a larger brainstorm that you can then comment on more finely. So when I'm picturing in the in-person version would be empty flip chart paper with a heading that was already created and having people kind of write down either more specific strategies that pertain to that goal or to create comments on, you know, I have a question here. I want to clarify this, or we should maybe wordsmith this a little bit more. So for here, I put an example of sharing coalition goals. So, you know, the goal that we already identified via our brainstorm is to host 2 virtual summits. In that line, here you can add, again, kind of post-it notes and comments to brainstorm topics here that align with this goal. And then same over here. If your goal is to recruit 5 new members, you can add comments here on how do we want to recruit them, and so on and so forth. And all of these are free. Those are more writing based. If you want something a little bit more creative, I really enjoy using Google Slide as a vision board activity. So this is a real screen grab from our Training Institute brainstorm on what we wanted to do for our 2022 calendar year and what kind of goals we wanted to have in our trainings, what we wanted to focus on, what values we wanted to highlight. And so we each had our own empty Google slide with our name on it, where either in the meeting we were able to add to this or separate outside of the meeting and then present it during the meeting. So it felt good. It felt really good. I feel like to get creative, to add those pictures and then share that too. Because again, some people like to write, some people prefer to work in images. And I'll let Jamia explain Coggle.
So Kaggle is a really good tool to think about like strategic planning and thinking, and it does different branches to kind of create like a flow chart. So in this one, we're thinking about activities for a board, so board development and alumni engagement and different ways that we can do that. So it allows people to be actively engaged in the process, to kind of start the conversation. You can also kind of take some of those stickies from other tools and put them into the Kaggle to then be able to allow space for people to continue to get more specific and detail things out. And I appreciate it because you can like move around the branches and see like how this all is sort of functioning together. So this is a really great tool for planning process and strategic thinking and things that have different sort of not only like activities, but also like timeline pieces. So it's really useful for that.
One thing I just wanted to add before I hand it back to Jamia too for the breakout group is just why we do this. Like the reason we have all of these different means of brainstorming and means of voting is to adapt to different learning styles. So there's a lot of theory out there that adults and children and young people all ages really learn differently in these 4 main buckets. So some people are visual learners, which is where the flip chart paper comes in handy, where the Google vision boards come in handy. Some people like to learn by auditory or by listening. I know for me, that is not my learning style. I have to listen to a podcast episode at least 3 times before I retain half of it. So, you know, some people really like to have the printed out materials in front of them or to have the slides in advance so they can follow along instead of just listening, or having the recording sent out after so they can like go back if they happen to miss something. Some people like to read and write, and some people are kinesthetic learners where they appreciate thinking by movement. So all this to say, your participatory processes, they don't have to touch on all 4 of them at once, but as you're thinking about the different ways that people can share and engage, you should be pulling from different ones every so often to make sure that you're not just doing writing activities, not just doing movement activities, not just doing writing, but just diversifying it to bring that community voice in as many ways as possible so that people can learn and share in ways that feel comfortable and safe and like resonate with them too. So I know we're already at 11:16, but we do want to give you time to practice. So I'm going to let Jamia explain the small group activity before we come back and do some Q&A.
Maybe we can take a straw poll on this actually. We do want to give you time to practice and think about, you know, what sort of tools might you use in a specific activity. but I'm seeing the comment in the box, and also I'm also thinking that others might have questions that they would like to discuss. Let's take a straw poll and see what people would like to do. Can we possibly stop sharing for just a second? So we're going to use the emojis. So if you would like to do the activity and to take some time to practice this with the scenario, you can give a thumbs up. But if you would like to stay in here and ask questions, let's do the heart. So we're using the reaction emoji. So stay in here, heart, or do the questions. Seeing a lot of hearts.
Yep, right now, I like that Zoom keeps the tracker. So I have about 14 hearts and 2 or so thumbs. So yeah, I think the hearts win this round. So thank you, Jamia, for modeling that, how we can kind of bring in more of these processes into spaces.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's stay here and ask and do a Q&A. And so I see Christine's comment in the box. I think this is a really important thing. And it comes up in community meetings, especially when you know, the reality of the world and the challenges that our members are facing is really important. And if you know, if these are people that you know, and you sort of know their challenges, I would create spaces for them to have these types of conversations. And it doesn't mean you're going to fix them, but it allows them space to process, to vent, possibly share resources that you may have, or partnerships you may have, but also knowing that in a space where this could come up and there's sort of a different agenda, that maybe this isn't, you know, don't create a space for sort of, you know, create multiple spaces to have multiple kinds of conversations is my point. But this is a real challenge, and people come with their problems. And you know, sometimes you do take a few minutes to kind of talk with them and have them feel heard in that space without necessarily going too deep into the existing challenge. Others have thoughts on that too, of how they sort of manage those situations in meetings, please feel free to share. But also other questions, if you want to raise your hands or put them in the chat.
Meetings where somebody shared a really important and vulnerable need like that, and you know, acknowledging like that thank you for sharing has always been helpful, of course, and then creating an open question if that person felt comfortable sharing with the group, saying, is there an open share here for resources? I mean, luckily I'm in spaces that are often very keyed into material resources like that because of the folks that we serve and work with. But I think an open question and maybe an action plan for follow-up has been helpful in my experience.
Yeah, the follow-up and the handoff is really important, you know, especially if you're going to, you know, connect them with another resource or someone else is going to help them. That handoff can be really important in building the relationship, checking back with them to see how that went. And also just making sure that the partnerships or the resources you have are really good partners and will follow through is also important. Jen is asking, wondering about how to, am I missing one? I missed one, I'm sorry. Catherine has one. Thoughts on how to handle a powerful voice in a meeting that may not always allow space for ideas to feel welcome and or valued. Yes, that is a very tough one when there are very powerful voices in a meeting space. I think a good opportunity for that is breakout groups. To allow space for more communication, but also thinking about the group agreements if you establish group agreements and sharing space, that can be helpful to kind of go back to the group agreements, that everyone's accountable to upholding those group agreements, sharing space, allowing those that haven't spoken time. And sometimes it takes really strong facilitation. Sometimes you have to interrupt, cut in, say, I really hear you, but I would love to have other people speak up to add to this conversation. We have a group agreement sometimes is like, you know, have two people, you know, if you are an active speaker, have two people speak before you speak again, or something like that, as an agreement that everyone can be accountable to. Kelly or anyone else have thoughts on that question? You want to take the next question, Kelly?
Yeah, I'll take the next question. So that was from, to scroll back up, Jen, around wondering how to rebuild trust in community in community meetings after community has not been communicated with well. I think there's a lot at play there. I think I'm wondering if like the trust was broken because there was like a past leader opportunity and then like a new group or new leadership took over and now they want to do things differently. But I think no matter what the context is, transparency and like accountability is the best way to do it. Is some people just want to like their feelings to be validated and to say like, listen, we haven't done this in the past. And we're committing moving forward to do this, and to say maybe like we understand that you might not believe that we actually want to hear your opinion. It will take time for us to build back trust, but I think speaking those things will at least be the first step into helping to rebuild that trust, because it won't be an overnight thing. What do others think?
It's also like a really deep mistrust between, you know, usually someone who has lots of power and someone who doesn't. There is facilitation practices around like reconciliation and like truth and reconciliation processes that take longer than one meeting, that include accountability, that include next steps, that includes changed behavior, which is important. Like you cannot continue to maintain this sort of structure. And I think it's important to kind of think about those facilitation processes, which are longer relationship building. It takes more than, you know, a few meetings to get through that and to rebuild that trust. And there are people that facilitate specifically that sort of reconciliation process. Let's see.
And I think, yeah, the next question around living in a rural area with limited access to broadband. I hear you. Like I said, I am now living in Vermont, and we work with providers from across the state. And a lot of our meetings are phone meetings just for that reason, because broadband is an issue. And so I think this is where you can tap into some of those individual reflections. So if folks are on their phones, given that they're not driving, at least they can at least take the time to write their ideas down and then share back that way. And even if they don't want to share back in the meeting, the fact that everyone has written things down, they can then later maybe upload them to a shared document or send an email that way, so that they're still engaging and having that participation opportunity, but it just looks different and accommodates the low broadband. That's one idea. Jamia, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think there are also some organizations, or I guess maybe foundations, that are trying to support like creating more what are those things called for the access broadband, like the
like the hotspots?
The hotspots. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know nothing about technology. The hotspots, but I mean, it just goes to show that this is a real like infrastructure issue that our country has, that we need to address, particularly as we want to, you know, be more technologically savvy, that, you know, people have these very basic needs that are not being met, and broadband is very important right now. So, you know, I think to the best that you can kind of accommodate and have those phone meetings, and creating socially distanced in-person meetings for those folks as well, to try to create space for that.
I'm also loving all of the support going on in the chat too, the back and forth. I think again, like, this is a facilitative training. We are not the experts. You all hold such expertise too. So I really appreciate you all consistently sharing that expertise and perspective throughout this training.
So just in the last few minutes, I think we just wanted to kind of close out though, but please, if you have questions, feel free to email Kelly or myself. We'll be glad to answer. And so we'll just kind of move quickly through this. Quick tips that we have. I'll just highlight a few of them. I do think doing less is more. Sometimes we overthink things, and sometimes just going back and reverting back to just having a phone meeting is going to be the easier thing to get people to participate. And I think having, to the points sort of like in the chat, sometimes the one-to-one check-ins are good. The multiple events, like, particularly if you have language accessibility, sometimes you have different events to cater to different communities, and you have a space where you can kind of bring in all of the thinking together, perhaps through, a Padlet or a Jamboard or something like that, where you can take all those things and they have language accessibility. Mentioned the hotspots, and always just having space for creativity and allowing that flexibility for things to be adaptable. These are just a few resources. I don't think we need to go through them, but different ways that we have utilized some of those sort of individual tools for journaling and taking breaks and checking in with yourself, particularly as we get Zoom fatigue, or just generally taking care of ourselves in these challenging times. That's us. And so you can reach out to us directly for any questions you might have. And we really appreciate you coming. Tanayo just put in a feedback survey. We'd appreciate if you take a minute to click on that link and fill it out so that we can get here the feedback on how this went. And we appreciate all of your time and spending your Tuesday morning with us. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate just how present you all were and how engaged, and just how you brought your voice in through unmuting, through sharing in the chat. Again, I learned so much through these trainings, and I always feel super energized doing these for you all. So really appreciate you.
Your Tuesday.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day, rest of your day. We'll stay on for a couple more minutes in case anyone has any last questions, but otherwise, feel free to go about your day. Thank you.
Please fill out the feedback form.